two men are facing each other down, all offense, and each one looking for the other to make a move for that nuclear six-gun, and both of them knowing perfectly well that the man that gets in the first shot has got the best chance of survival. Now that's an unstable situation in my view.
There is one group caught in the middle of the controversy over strategic defense. It is our NATO allies in Western Europe. Europeans know their homelands could be the site of a future superpower conflict, one that could easily escalate to the nuclear level. So when the United States talks of a change in strategic doctrine, Europeans become nervous. They rely on America to keep the peace. These American troops stationed in West Germany are the front line of deterrence. They are part of an American force in Europe that numbers more than 300,000. If the Soviet Union were to invade our NATO allies, the troops here are ready to fight. Their primary function, though, is to prevent the Soviets from even considering an invasion.
All right, let's go.
But it's not the troops themselves that deter Soviet aggression, it's what they represent. The soldiers here symbolize America's guarantee to defend Europe with nuclear weapons if necessary. The goal is to leave the Soviets uncertain as to how NATO would respond to an attack. It's a strategy called flexible response.
There isn't a calculation that could take place in the Kremlin which says that they could attack us and win or survive. There isn't a calculation, however you try to work it out. The essence of our defense policy is to maintain that certainty that we're not going to attack them, but if they attack us, it is a policy of certain disaster for them. Now, once you get behind that situation, you see why we have preserved the peace in Western Europe and in the North Atlantic Partnership so successfully for so long. There isn't a calculation upon which that peace can be undermined.
Most Europeans credit the United States nuclear guarantee with keeping the peace here. So it's easy to see why many would be apprehensive about the Strategic Defense Initiative and its goal of making nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. They are reluctant to abandon a strategy that has worked so well for so long. American officials have tried to gain support over here by claiming that strategic defenses would ultimately protect Europe as well as the United States. Many European defense analysts, however, remain skeptical. They do not believe Europe could ever be fully protected from nuclear attack. After all, there are low-flying Soviet missiles and bombers stationed just a few hundred miles away. As they see it, Europe will always be vulnerable. But some analysts think Europeans should support the Strategic Defense Initiative anyway, even if it will not protect them directly. They believe Europe will be more secure if America can protect itself from nuclear attack. That is because an American president will be more likely to honor the U.S. nuclear guarantee if his own cities are safe from Soviet retaliation.
The present strategy, as you know, is one of flexible response, but the final rung in the ladder of escalation is an exchange of nuclear missiles between the United States and the Soviet Union. And we depend on the readiness of America to press the button. Now, many people have doubted whether America would press the button, knowing that the response from the Soviets would be catastrophic in the damage that it would cause to the American homelands. Now, I think that the effect of an effective defensive system, if we get one, will be to diminish those risks, because it would save American lives and it would protect American military installations. So the guarantees would be more viable because the costs, the potential costs of giving those guarantees would be fewer.
But the assumption we have to make is that the Soviet Union will also move in the same direction. The Soviet Union will also begin to protect itself and may succeed in large measure in protecting itself. Then what happens? The danger, as the Europeans will see it, is that you've made the world safe again for conventional war. Because what is it that would deter the Soviet Union then from attacking Western Europe. What I think deters them now is the possibility, indeed the probability, that any war in Europe would escalate to the nuclear level, from which there would be no winners. Both the Soviet Union and the United States would be wholly destroyed. Now, if you remove that danger and risk, then I think you could get the Soviet Union more adventurous and be prepared to think about the kind of military aggressive moves in Europe which they have forsworn for so long.
It is important to understand that the strategic defense controversy is really nothing new. The same issues were raised before the anti-ballistic missile treaty was signed in the early 1970s. Ironically, back then it was the Soviets who favored developing defensive weapons. We persuaded them that such weapons would be dangerously destabilizing. And since the anti-ballistic missile treaty was signed, neither the United States nor the Soviet Union has done more than research defensive weapons capabilities. The debate today, however, has taken on a new intensity because of President Reagan's desire to move beyond the research phase. A number of administration officials have said publicly that if strategic defense proves to be workable and cost-effective, the United States wants to go ahead with deployment. But there's a problem with that. Deployment would be a clear violation of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. So the administration has been talking about negotiating new arms agreements, agreements that would allow both sides to build defense systems. The idea is to have the Soviets join us in a transition from a world that relies on mutual assured destruction to one that relies on defense.
We wish to discuss that now with the Russians. We wish to discuss with them now how one might manage a joint project toward the introduction into the forces of both sides of such systems if they're developed by us or developed by the Soviets.
I just don't think that's in the cards at the moment, because the Soviet Union is viewing the whole thing with the gravest suspicion. And therefore you have to live with the probability, not just possibility, but the probability that the Soviet Union will do what they can to prevent that defense working. One of the ways of doing that is simply to have a lot more missiles than they have at the moment, so as to be able to saturate whatever defense the Americans might be able to create.
As Colonel Alford suggests, the Soviet Union has shown no interest in even discussing a transition to defense. Soviet negotiators even said that further progress on arms control was impossible, so long as the United States continued to develop its Star Wars defense.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
President Reagan was urged to break the impasse by using the Strategic Defense Initiative as a bargaining chip. Reagan's critics suggested he forego testing and development of SDI in return for deep cuts in the Soviet nuclear arsenal. Reagan refused.
Are you telling the American people tonight you're ruling out a deal on testing or development?
I think that's a legitimate part of research, and yes, I would rule that out. I don't mind saying here, and normally I don't talk about, as you said, what's going to be your strategy in negotiations. But in this is too important to the world to have us be willing to trade that off for a different number of nuclear missiles when there are already more than enough to blow both countries out of the world.
Mr. Chairman, fellow members, I rise to offer an amendment to the fiscal year 86 defense authorization that addresses what is perhaps the central world security issue of our time, banishing the threat of nuclear holocaust from our planet forever.
In the United States Congress, the debate on strategic defense began. Advocates of the Reagan plan argued that the Soviets were preparing a first strike capability that would further destabilize deterrence. They said America had no choice but to move forward toward strategic defense.
Now is the time to choose. We can continue down the road we have been since the 1960s, depending upon more and more sophisticated weapons of mass destruction to deter war, or we can choose the high road of mutual assured survival.
Opponents countered that deployment of Star Wars would only escalate the arms race further.
Mr. Chairman, I believe strongly that the only effective means to reduce the kind of tension that leads to nuclear confrontation is through negotiation and dialogue, through adherence to our treaty commitments and monitoring of Soviet compliance. Of course we need a deterrent, and I've always supported that. But technology and fear have gotten us into this predicament technology, and sheer bravado will not get us out. It will only dig us in deeper.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what...
The heavens are for wonder, not for war. Stop Star Wars. Stop weapons in space.
Perhaps the strongest challenge to strategic defense came from scientists. Hundreds of them signed pledges refusing to participate in Star Wars research. But Congress put up the money, and the project continued.
The objective is not to build weapons. The objective is to make a more secure world. And the way to do that is to use every possible motivation to show that missiles and continuing to proliferate missiles is the wrong course of action.
The president is very much of the view that in the long run, we really should take seriously what has been the declared policy of both the Soviet Union and of the United States, that you'd like to get rid of nuclear weapons in their entirety. You'd like to get rid of these terrible beasts. And he thinks, and I believe, that the chance of doing that would be much greater if one could move from the current kind of a situation where we rely primarily on the offense to a situation where we rely increasingly upon a defense, which would deny the enemy a chance of gaining really from an initial strike.
The Soviets remained unconvinced. When he met Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in Iceland in October 1986, Reagan again proposed his zero option for Europe. But Gorbachev said any such agreement must include limitations on the deployment of SDI. Neither side seemed willing to make concessions. Then, 5 months later, Gorbachev did. In a surprise announcement, he said the Soviets would accept the zero option even without Star Wars concessions.
I think Gorbachev is a great deal more flexible than his predecessors, and his policy of linking an agreement on intermediate nuclear forces to one causing the U.S. to abandon SDI simply didn't work. And he's a pragmatist, and if he has a policy that doesn't work, he's likely to replace it with one that he hopes will work.
But our NATO allies were skeptical. After all, they said, the Russians would still have 130 short-range nuclear missiles in Eastern Europe. NATO possessed no such missiles. In those circumstances, our allies argued, they could not afford to trade away their nuclear deterrent.
There hasn't been a war for 40 years. If anybody can explain to me why there hasn't been a war for 40 years, other than because there is a deterrence, and we keep up our capacity and our credibility in matters of defense, I'm prepared to listen to anybody who's got another explanation. But to me, there isn't another explanation, and we would be mad to give it away, and mad to pretend that there is any other way at the present time of keeping the peace of the world.
So Gorbachev provided another surprise. Meeting United States Secretary of State George Shultz in Moscow, Gorbachev offered to remove and destroy all Soviet short-range missiles aimed at Europe. 2 weeks later, United States and Soviet negotiators met again to prepare a treaty eliminating all intermediate range, or INF, nuclear forces from Europe.
We expect to see a good treaty from our part.